in the quiet corners of forgotten villages, beneath the banyan trees where no one dares to pray, among the ashes of ancient temples and the shadows of funeral pyres, whispers travel with the wind. These are not tales told for children. These are stories of spirits unburned, names unspoken, rituals remembered only by the damned and those who still dream of the dead. Welcome to a place where folklore is not fiction, and the veil between the living and the lost is paper thin. This is Whispers of Asia, where every story comes with a price. Are you willing to listen, even if it follows you home?
In the outskirts of Nakhon Pathom, far from the chatter of city life, there stood a temple older than memory. Its walls, blackened by time and incense, seemed to weep with every rainfall. The crematorium was tucked behind it, quiet, crumbling, and always breathing faint wisps of smoke, like a sleeping serpent, never fully at rest. This was where Noi worked, not out of passion, not out of calling, but because the dead did not ask questions, and Noi had spent his entire life running from those who did. He was 24, thin, with gentle eyes that looked away more often than they met. He spoke little, and when he did, it was soft, as though every word risked waking something ancient and buried. Most who met him assumed he was slow. Few realized that Noi simply listened more than he spoke. And in a place like this, the dead had much to say. By day, he swept ash from the oven's edge, arranged offerings, folded robes around the newly deceased. By night, he slept in a single room beside the cremation hall, lulled to sleep by the faint crackle of bone and sandalwood. He'd long learned to live without dreams, or so he thought. His mentor, Ajahn Prasert, was a bald, weathered man who had tended to the dead for over 3 decades. He treated corpses with reverence, as though each held a story too fragile to be forgotten. "The body is not the end," he told Noi one evening, as they sat on the temple steps beneath a full moon. "It's the beginning of silence, and silence, child, is where ghosts begin." Noi nodded, though he did not fully understand. Still, he felt it, that heavy quiet that clung to the crematorium like humidity, the way the flames sometimes whispered, the way ashes sometimes clumped together in strange shapes, the way some funerals felt heavier, darker, as if more than just flesh had been set alight. There were rules here, unspoken ones, and Noi had learned them like muscle memory. Never look a body in the eyes after sundown. Never take food from the funeral tables. Never burn alone during the new moon. And above all, never question why some coffins arrived sealed and left unopened. Ajahn Prasert didn't explain those ones. He didn't have to. Noi had heard the rumors of ghost marriages arranged between families who wished to wed their deceased children for spiritual completeness or darker reasons. Of Pi Tai Hong, spirits of those who died violently or unjustly, lingering like smoke without wind. Of cursed brides, dressed in red, their eyes never fully closed. But rumors were like the wind. They came, whispered, and moved on, until the wind stopped. It was the end of Vasa, the rainy retreat. The monsoon had left behind mud and mosquitoes, and the temple was unusually empty. Prasert had taken ill, coughing blood and bitterness in equal measure. So for the first time, Noi was left to manage the cremation schedule alone. That was when they came. A black car, expensive and too clean for a road so rural, pulled up just past dusk. Out stepped 3 people: an older man in a gold-trimmed suit, a woman draped in dark silk, and a younger man who didn't speak. They didn't introduce themselves, they didn't bow. Instead, they handed Noy an envelope, thick with cash, and a name written in red ink, Chonica. Age, 21. Unmarried. Cause of death, undisclosed. Instructions, private cremation, tonight. No witnesses. Do not open the veil. The coffin they brought was white lacquered, unlike the plain wood boxes used by villagers. It gleamed under the temple lanterns, and the moment it was placed inside the cremation hall, the air grew colder. Noy wanted to ask why. Why the rush? Why at night? Why the secrecy? But the man in the gold-trimmed suit stared through him, eyes dark and unreadable. "He don't speak to her," he said quietly, voice slick with something unclean. "Just burn her, and don't lift the veil." Then they left without waiting for an answer. Inside the cremation hall, under flickering fluorescent light, Noy approached the coffin. He wasn't used to fear, not here, where he spent every day among the dead. But something about this felt wrong. The silence was too thick, the shadows too long, and the air, it smelled not of jasmine or incense, but of roses long dead, their sweetness turned sour. Still, duty was duty. He unlatched the coffin lid, slowly, reverently, and there she was, Chonica. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, pale skin like polished ivory, hands folded over her chest, clutching a garland of white orchids. Her lips were painted crimson, and over her face a scarlet veil, shimmering with golden thread, draped down like blood from a wound. Noy swallowed. The envelope's warning echoed in his mind. Do not lift the veil. So he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he lit the first candle, prepared the kindling, whispered the mantras he'd memorized by sound, not meaning. His hands trembled as he approached the furnace switch. Then, a sound. A single drip, like water falling from stone. He turned. Nothing. The hall was empty. The doors were closed. The body hadn't moved. Or had it? Noy stepped closer. His breath caught. There were tears on her cheeks. Thin, glistening lines, dried but unmistakable, tracing from beneath the veil down to her painted lips. His pulse quickened. His skin turned cold. Noy knew that the dead did not cry, not after embalming, not after being dressed, painted, and posed. Unless they hadn't truly died before the rituals began. Unless someone had buried her alive. The furnace crackled behind him, the candles flickered, and the veil seemed to breathe. Noy's hand reached forward, slow as dusk, trembling against reason. He shouldn't. He couldn't. But he had to know. With one finger, he lifted the veil, just enough to see her eyes. They were open, slightly, just enough to reveal dull, glassy irises and the unmistakable mark of dried tears pooled at the corner. No scream, no gasp, just the sound of a soul slipping off its axis. Noy staggered back, hands shaking. He dropped the veil. But the moment it fell, he heard it. A voice, not out loud, not in the room, but inside him. You saw me. It was soft, feminine, sad. Now you are mine. The wind outside stopped. The temple bell swayed though no one had touched it. And in the shadows of the cremation hall, the bride in red smiled.
Noy did not sleep that night. He tried. Curled in his small bed beside the crematorium's utility room, he pulled the woven blanket to his chin and shut his eyes tight. But sleep would not come. Only the image of her face, still beneath the veil, and yet somehow awake. He told himself it was exhaustion, that the eyes weren't open, that the tears weren't real, but the whisper still echoed, "You saw me." And worse, he believed it. At dawn, Noi lit incense and walked barefoot to the main altar, as he always did after a late cremation. But today the smoke seemed sluggish, the joss sticks fizzled. Even the saffron-robed Buddha statue on the altar looked heavier, as if weighed down by something unseen. Ajahn Prasad was still bedridden. Noi considered waking him, confessing what he had done, but fear sealed his lips. What would he say? That he had lifted the veil of a cursed bride? That her eyes had cried after death? That her spirit had whispered to him, inside his skull, not through his ears? It sounded mad. And yet, something inside Noi knew it was real. At mid-morning, a delivery truck arrived. The driver was a young man from the next village, chewing betel and reeking of diesel. He handed Noi a small urn wrapped in red silk and a folded slip of paper. "Lift this in the warehouse," he mumbled. "Said it belonged to a Chinika." Noi's blood turned to ice. He stared at the urn. It was far too light to contain ashes. Inside, when unwrapped, he found only a bundle of hair, coiled and tied with a red thread. And the paper? It bore only a single line. She was not meant to burn alone. Noi nearly dropped the urn. His hands shook, his throat dried. Someone was playing with forces they did not understand, or perhaps they understood them all too well. That night, Noi dreamed of her. Not like before, vague shapes and fog. This time it was clear, cold, real. He was standing inside the cremation hall, the furnace silent, the candles long since melted, and she was sitting upright inside her coffin, the red veil gone, her wedding dress soaked in something dark, her eyes staring straight at him. But it wasn't anger he saw, it was longing. She raised a hand toward him. "They promised me love. They gave me fire instead." Noi couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She leaned forward. "But you saw me. You chose me. That means we are bound." Noi shook his head, desperate to wake. "No, I didn't mean to. It is already done." Her voice was so gentle, and yet every syllable carried the weight of a curse. "You lifted the veil. That is the vow." Suddenly, Noi was no longer standing in the cremation hall. He was in a dark wedding ceremony, surrounded by shadowy figures. No faces, only eyes, staring. She stood beside him, in the same red gown. A monk with no mouth chanted words he couldn't understand. A garland of jasmine was placed over both their heads. And then, blood. So much blood. It poured from her eyes, from his hands, from the floor beneath their feet. "Now we burn together," she said. And Noi awoke, gasping, with the scent of burned orchids in his nose and ashes on his bedsheets. The days that followed blurred. Noi couldn't eat, couldn't focus. Everywhere he turned he saw red, in ribbons left on temple trees, in the wilted hibiscus near the cremation furnace, in the dying sun that seemed to bleed into the horizon. He stopped lighting incense at night. He stopped sleeping altogether, because every time he closed his eyes, she returned, and each night she came closer. Ajahn Prasad noticed. "You've seen something," he muttered over boiled rice one morning. something you weren't meant to. Noi froze, said nothing. The old man leaned forward. You never questioned the sealed coffins, he whispered. Some families pay for silence. Some ghosts demand it. Noi's lips trembled. Why would someone marry the dead? Ajahn Prasad's eyes darkened. Because the living are greedy, he said. They want luck, power, protection, sometimes vengeance. He looked toward the cremation hall, his voice dropping to a near growl. They dress the dead in red, to invite them back, to bind them to our world. They call it love, but it is not love. It is a contract. Noi swallowed hard. And what if someone lifts the veil? The old man went pale. Noi, you didn't. That night, as the monsoon wind howled across the countryside, Noi returned to the cremation hall. He had to see her again, not in dreams, not in flickers, but truly. He unlocked the rear door, entered alone, lit a single candle. The room was cold, colder than it should have been. And there, against all reason, the coffin was still there, untouched, unburned. Despite the fire, despite the rituals, despite everything, the white lacquer still gleamed, the red veil still hung. She had never left. He stepped forward, this time not to lift the veil, but to open the coffin. The air grew thick, heavy. Every instinct screamed him to stop, but he didn't. He lifted the coffin lid slowly and found nothing. Empty silk sheets, a folded wedding dress, a red garland dried and crumbling. No body, no bride. Noi nearly dropped the urn. His hands shook, his throat dried. Then he heard it, a rustling. He turned, and he saw her, Chanika, standing in the corner of the hall. No veil, no smile, only eyes that had waited far too long. I told you, you chose me.
The candle flickered, the shadows stretched, and Chanika stood still, silent, watching him. Noi could not move, not from fear, not from confusion, but from something deeper, like the grip of a hand reaching inside his chest, holding his heart steady between its fingers. Her presence filled the room, not with noise, but with grief. The kind of sorrow so thick it clings to the walls, the kind that rots behind smiles and rituals and silk robes, the kind no one dares name. She stepped forward. Her bare feet didn't make a sound. Noi opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. And then he saw them again. Her eyes, still glistening, still open, still crying, not tears of fear, but of betrayal. They said I would rest, she said softly, but they fed me to fire with no love, no farewell, no truth. Noi backed away, bumping into the coffin behind him. The lid clamored shut, but she didn't flinch. You looked, Noi. She said his name like a vow. And once the living sees the eyes of the bound dead, they are seen in return. Her voice didn't echo, it bled. The next morning, the temple rooster crowed, but Noi didn't hear it. He sat motionless in the utility room, staring at his ash-dusted palms. He didn't remember walking back from the cremation hall. He didn't remember leaving the coffin. He didn't remember falling asleep. All he remembered was her voice and the look in her eyes. Eyes that were never meant to be seen. Eyes that should have closed long ago. But they hadn't. Because something had gone wrong, or something had been planned. By noon, Noy could no longer hold it in. He went to Ajahn Prasert, who was still too weak to stand, but strong enough to hear the truth. Noy told him everything, about the sealed coffin, about the veil, the tears, the dreams, the ghost bride standing in the corner, the coffin that burned but didn't, and the body that vanished. Prasert's face sagged with dread. "I feared this," he murmured. "I thought we'd been careful." Noy leaned in. "What do you mean?" The old man's eyes were hollow now, as if staring into a memory he wished he could unsee. "She wasn't the first," he whispered, "and she won't be the last." Years ago, before Noy arrived, the temple had nearly lost its license to operate funerals. There had been complaints, whispers that certain wealthy families were performing rites the monks refused to bless, that the crematorium was being used for something darker than grieving. "Ghost marriages," Prasert said bitterly. "Binding dead brides to dead grooms, making offerings, promising rebirth or revenge." "But she wasn't married," Noy said. "That's what makes it worse," Prasert replied. "She wasn't dead when she was sealed. These rituals, they require the spirit to be ready. If it's not, if they kill for the ceremony, the soul doesn't move on. It becomes trapped, twisted, angry." Pi Tai hung, the violently dead, now wearing a wedding gown. Noy returned to the cremation hall at sunset. He didn't want to. Every part of his body ached to run, to leave, to forget. But something deeper pulled him back. Guilt, fear, curiosity, and perhaps something closer to obsession. He found the coffin lid still shut. He touched it, cold. The air didn't move. He whispered her name, Chanika. Silence. And then he heard it. From behind him, a soft, wet sob. He turned, and there she was again. Only this time, she looked alive. Paler, yes, but breathing, standing in the wedding dress, untouched by flame, veil in hand, eyes open, weeping. "I didn't want to be seen like this," she whispered. Noy's lips trembled. "What happened to you?" "They promised me protection," she said. "They promised me peace, but they lied. They wanted a bride, not a person." He stepped closer. She didn't move. "They said I would be married in the spirit world, that my soul would ascend with his. But he was already gone. I was buried alive, dressed in red, sealed my mouth with wax, and waited for the ritual to be complete." Noy felt his knees go weak. I saw your tears," she nodded. "You were the only one who looked, the only one who noticed. And now, you are the only one who can finish it." That night, Noy didn't return to his bed. He sat beside her coffin, listening. She told him everything about the man she was supposed to marry, a spirit medium from another province. He had died before their union, but the families had still arranged the wedding. They believed that marrying her to his spirit would give spiritual protection to the living relatives, that her suffering would become their fortune. They paid monks to look the other way. They paid the crematorium to prepare her alone. And when she begged them to stop, they smiled. A bride must not cry on her wedding day. So she wept in silence until her lungs collapsed and her heart stopped. Noi wept with her now, not out of pity, but out of shame, because by lifting the veil, he had completed what they began. He had made the marriage real. And now the spirit who once wanted release wanted something else entirely. The next morning, Noi went to the head monk. He asked for access to the cremation records, told him it was for paperwork. But in truth, he was looking for a name. Chanika's fiancé, her groom, the man she was promised to in the afterlife. He found it. Prana Tanarat, died 1 year prior. Cause, sudden heart failure during a ritual. Cremated at the same temple. Noi froze. He remembered that cremation because he had prepared the fire. But something didn't add up. The ashes from Pran's cremation were never collected. There was no urn on the shelf, no name in the registry of claimed remains. Just a note scrawled in red ink. Left to burn for 7 days. Do not disturb. Noi's breath caught. 7 days? No cremation lasted that long. Not without purpose, not without ritual. Chanika's groom wasn't just cremated, he had been sacrificed. That night, as Noel lit incense in the cremation hall, he heard her voice again. He is gone, Noi. His soul was consumed, and I was left behind, alone, forgotten, trapped. Noi bowed his head. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't be, she replied. You saw me. You gave me eyes again. She stepped closer. And now you want yours. Noi no longer trusted sleep. It came like fog, slow, quiet, and choking. Each time he closed his eyes, he awoke somewhere else. Somewhere she was waiting. The first night, he found himself back in the cremation hall. But the walls were wet, the air thick with incense and rot. Rows of coffins lined the room, each one rocking gently, as if something inside was still alive. He walked between them, his bare feet leaving prints in ash. Then he saw her, Chanika, sitting atop her own coffin, barefoot, veil in hand. Come, she said, let me show you where they buried the truth. She reached for his hand. He didn't resist. She led him into the furnace, not the physical one he cleaned each morning, but one made of bone and blackened bricks, stretching like a tunnel underground. The deeper they walked, the colder it became. Shadows danced along the walls. Faint whispers echoed, fragments of rituals, chants, cries for help that were never answered. At the end of the tunnel sat a pair of thrones made from funeral plaques, one empty, the other soaked in dried blood.
"This is where they married me," Chanika whispered. "Not in spirit, not in soul, but in debt." She turned to him. Her face glowed faintly in the dark. "You can end it, Noi, but not with fire. You must find what was left of him and burn it beside me. Only then can I leave." He wanted to ask why him? Why not the monks? Why not someone trained? But her eyes silenced the question. "Because you saw me, and now I see only you." Noi awoke gasping, drenched in sweat, the taste of ash in his mouth. He checked his hands. They were black with soot. And beside his bed lay a small white flower, a wilted orchid, the same kind she had held in her hands the night she arrived. He spent the next day in silence. Arjan Prasert tried to speak with him, but Noi could barely form words. His mind was still in the tunnel, among the ashes of ghost thrones and whispered vows. He returned to the cremation records again. This time, he searched beyond the names. He looked at the dates. The night Prantanarat died, exactly 1 year ago, 3 other funerals had been cancelled. All 3 were scheduled for the same night. All 3 were infants. Noi's heart dropped. Blood must answer for blood. A bride must balance the scale. If the groom's soul is weak, it must be strengthened. Phrases surfaced in his mind like ink in water. They weren't his thoughts. They were hers. That night, he dreamed again. This time, he stood in a wedding hall, not modern, not lavish, but old, faded. A rural structure with wooden beams and yellowing walls. Offerings rotted in the corners. Portraits of ancestors watched from above, their faces warped. Chanika stood beside him, dressed again in red. But she wasn't the bride. He was. He wore the red veil. He was being led to her. Incense swirling, drums beating slowly. "You have taken his place," a voice chanted from the shadows. "You opened the veil. Now you must wear it." Noi tried to run, but his feet were buried in bone dust. Chanika lifted his veil. Slowly. "Do not be afraid. You are already halfway here." He woke with a scream. His pillow was soaked with tears that were not his, and beneath the blanket, in the crook of his arm, lay a small white hair, a lock of black hair, tied in red thread. Noi no longer asked if he was cursed. He knew. The line between dream and waking had collapsed. Her world and his had intertwined, and now there was no boundary left. He went to the monks again, this time to a man named Luangpi Dunchai, a reclusive elder who rarely spoke but was known for dealing with spiritual matters the other monks avoided. Noi confessed everything: the dreams, the veil, the tears, the ghost bride who hadn't left, the missing ashes, the blood wedding in the furnace below his mind. Dunchai listened in silence. Then he said only this: "You have seen what you were not meant to, but now you are part of it. There is no cleansing, no retreat. There is only fulfillment or decay." Noi asked him, "What must I do?" The old monk's eyes were already distant, like he had glimpsed something through Noi's shadow. "You must find what binds her. The body is gone. but something remains. She cannot rest until she is united with what was stolen, or until she takes something to replace it. Noy returned to the cremation hall one final time that evening. He didn't light a candle. He didn't knock. He simply entered and whispered, "Show me." The veil, once laid atop the coffin, was now pinned to the wall with a ritual knife. It hadn't been there before. Beside it, a strand of prayer beads had cracked, the string frayed, beads scattered like broken time. On the floor, a circle of ash had formed overnight. Inside it, a clay doll, headless, clothed in red wedding silk. Noy stepped inside. His vision blurred. And suddenly, he was not in the cremation hall anymore. He was back in the tunnel. Only this time, the thrones were gone, and in their place was a mirror. Old, cracked, its frame made from lacquered funeral wood. He looked into it and saw not his own face, but hers, smiling and crying all at once.
There is a name whispered in temples and back alleys across Thailand, a name not spoken after dark, a name that means ruin, rage, and unfinished death. Pi Tai Hong. The spirits of those who die suddenly, violently, or without ritual, and remain tethered to the world by pain too deep for silence. And now Noy knew. Chanika was one of them. The morning after the dream of the cracked mirror, Noy knelt before Luangpi Danchai once more, this time with desperation in his voice and shaking in his bones. "She's not just a ghost, she's something more," Noy whispered. The old monk's eyes darkened like storm water. "Pi Tai Hong," he said flatly, "the most dangerous spirit of all." Noy clenched his fists. "She said I'm bound to her now." Danchai nodded, slowly. "You opened the veil. You became the one who sees. That is the first binding. The second is her name, which you have spoken aloud. The third," he paused, "is when she begins to dream through you." Noy said nothing, because she already had. They sat in silence as the rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, until it sounded like fists on the temple roof. Finally, Danchai reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a yellowed scroll wrapped in twine. He unfurled it carefully, revealing old diagrams, human figures surrounded by red circles, arrows pointing to pressure points, and script in ancient Khmer. "This," Danchai said, "is a protection diagram. It was used in ancient funerary rites, not to bless the dead, but to keep them from rising." He pointed to one symbol, a spiral with jagged edges drawn over the mouth. When someone is buried as a ghost bride, and not just as a body, the ritual changes. The soul is not released. It is redirected, controlled. But if the ritual is broken or incomplete, the spirit becomes rogue, hungry, possessive, and powerful. Noy stared at the parchment. "Can it be undone?" Danchai shook his head. "You cannot undo what was sealed with blood. You can only finish it."
Noi left the temple with the scroll tucked under his shirt and a fire in his lungs that no prayer could calm. He no longer feared her. He feared what she was becoming. That night, she did not appear in a dream. She appeared in his room. The power had gone out, the lights flickered, the fan stopped spinning, and from the shadows of the corner, her voice emerged. "You searched for me." Noi turned slowly. She stood barefoot in her red wedding gown, soaked in shadow. Her veil was gone, her eyes were darker than ever. "Why?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because I want to help you move on." "Move on?" She tilted her head slightly. "Do you think I want to go? Do you think I want to be released?" She was only inches away now. I was burned alive by my own family. My love was taken, my breath stolen, my name used in secret prayers for someone else's good fortune. Her breath touched his cheek, ice cold and fragrant with dried orchids and funeral smoke. "Why should I go when I can stay with you?" Noi couldn't speak, not because he was afraid, but because in some twisted place within him, he wanted her to stay. She had become the only thing in his world that felt real, the only presence that watched him without judgment, the only voice that remembered him when the living passed him by. That night, they spoke for hours, not in language, but in shared memory. She showed him flashes of her final breath inside the sealed coffin, of fingernails clawing at silk, of monks chanting while she screamed unheard beneath layers of ritual cloth. She showed him how her heart stopped, but her mind lingered, and when the flames touched her skin, it wasn't pain that gripped her, but betrayal. She was offered as a gift to a dead man, and when he did not come for her, she waited until someone else lifted the veil. Noi. By dawn, her image faded, but the scent of her stayed. And on his skin, where she had touched him, there remained a bruise, shaped like a thumbprint, and slightly warm. Ajahn Prosert finally emerged from his room that morning, pale but alert. He saw the mark on Noi's neck and did not ask questions. He only said, "You must burn her properly, boy, with honor, with truth, and with what was taken from her." Noi swallowed. "I don't know what that is." The old man nodded grimly. "Then you must go where her name still echoes, back to her home, to the house where she died. There you will find what remains." Noi didn't wait. He packed nothing but the scroll, a lighter, and a photo of the cremation registry, where her family's surname had been hastily scribbled. Tipwanich, a wealthy lineage from the province. He'd heard the name before. They owned land, orchards, a concrete factory, and it was whispered they also kept a shrine in the back of their estate, not for ancestors, but for spirits they had created. It took 2 buses and a motorcycle taxi, but by dusk he found the house. An old 3-story wooden home behind rusted gates and overgrown hedges. The windows were shut, the doors chained. But on the 2nd floor, through a cracked curtain, he saw her, watching, smiling, waiting. Noi returned from the Thipwanich estate without answers, but not without scars. He never made it past the locked gate. The moment he stepped onto the property, the wind stopped. The trees ceased their rustling. The insects went silent. Even the dogs in the neighborhood, always barking, fell mute. And then he heard it. A woman's voice, behind him, soft, gentle. "You are not ready." He turned, but no one was there. Only a red veil, torn, fluttering from a tree branch like something discarded or placed. That night, Noi lit 3 candles in front of the cremation furnace and made an offering of lotus petals. Then he sat in silence and waited for her. Chanika came not as a vision, nor as a whisper, but as a cold breath that slid beneath his skin and bloomed behind his eyes. He closed them, and she was there, inside his mind. "They've done it before," she said, "not just to me." The next morning he sought out Luangpi Danshai one last time. The old monk was reluctant. Fear clung to his robes like mildew. But when Noi begged to see the forbidden scrolls, the ones hidden deep inside the temple archives, the monk finally relented. Not with words, but with silence. Together they walked past the public library, past the monk quarters, and down a narrow staircase carved from stone. Beneath the main temple was a sealed chamber, its entrance guarded by wooden talismans etched with salt and ash. Some of them had cracked, some of them had faded, but all pulsed faintly when Noi passed through them. Danshai took a key from his neck, unlocked the door, and whispered, "You enter alone." Noi nodded. The air inside was colder than a grave. It was a room no larger than a monk's cell, but the shelves were packed with centuries of hidden knowledge, yellowed scrolls, black-bound ledgers, palm leaf manuscripts strung with thread. This was where the temple kept ritual records that were never meant to be copied, where they documented rites that had been outlawed, but not forgotten. And in the back corner, dusty and bound in red twine, Noi found it. Book of Shadow Marriages, 1867 to present. He opened it carefully. The ink was faded, but legible. Page after page. Name of deceased. Rite performed. Date. Purpose. Siriporn W. Bound marriage. 1872. Harvest fortune. Chaiwat M. Spirit consort. 1904. Lineage blessing. Kanya T. Ghost dowry. 1951. Sickness reversal. Chanika T. P. Tai Hong Bride. 2024. Soul replacement. His breath caught in his throat. There, in fresh ink, Chanika T. P. Tai Hong Bride. Soul replacement. He checked the bottom of the page. There were no signatures, only a symbol, a red veil stamped in wax. The truth was worse than he imagined. This wasn't a one-time sin. It was a tradition, a generational contract passed through decades of power-hungry families and complicit monks. They had buried women alive, painted them as brides, promised them peace, then used their dying breaths to bless businesses, remove misfortune, and protect legacies. Chanika wasn't an accident. She was a ritual offering. And he, Noi, had made it real by lifting her veil. But one detail stood out. In the column marked Soul Replacement, only 2 names appeared in the last century, Chanika and someone named Noi M, written beneath in faint pencil. He stared at it. That was his name,
But it wasn't his signature. It was dated 2 weeks before her cremation. "They chose you," a voice whispered behind him. He turned, but no one was there. Only shadows and incense dust. He looked again at the page, and beneath his name were the words, "If the groom is not dead, he must be claimed." He ran from the archive in silence. Danshai was waiting at the top of the stairs. When he saw Noi's face, he didn't ask what he'd found. He only said, "Now you understand." That night, the dreams changed. Noi wasn't standing beside Chanika. He was in her place. Inside the coffin, lungs filled with smoke, mouth sealed with wax, body dressed in red. And from above he saw them lowering the lid, Ajahn Prasert, the Thipwinich matriarch, and himself, another Noi, smiling, watching. He awoke with a scream and vomited black water onto the floor. There was a single funeral coin on his tongue, old, rusted, Burmese script, a token for the underworld. He had not swallowed it. It had been placed. He confronted Ajahn Prasert that morning. The old man was waiting for him. "I tried to stop it," Prasert said, before Noi could speak. "But they paid the temple, paid Danshai, paid me." Noi's fists clenched. "You let them choose me?" Prasert's eyes shimmered with shame. "No, they chose her first. You were just there, the apprentice, the one who would be alone when she arrived. You were the last ingredient." Nor nearly struck him, but Chanika's voice echoed inside his mind. "Don't waste your pain on the dying. Give it to the ones who live off ghosts." He now understood what she needed. Not just ashes, not just remains. She wanted justice. She wanted the ritual reversed, and that meant burning not just the veil, but the entire system that bound her. He returned to the cremation hall at midnight, placed the forbidden temple record into the furnace, and as the flames consumed the past, he whispered, "I see you, Chanika, and I will help you be seen." From the shadows, her voice returned, soft and cold. "Then we begin."
The temple kept many secrets, but none were deeper than the ones buried beneath the flames. Noi stood in the center of the cremation hall, the place where fire had devoured 1,000 bodies and yet left her untouched. Chanika, the Phi Tai Hong bride, the girl whose soul was bound, the woman whose veil he had lifted, and with it the boundary between the living and the damned. He now knew the truth. She was never burned, and the funeral was a performance. It began with an itch, a whisper, a thought that wouldn't leave. Why had the fire been so cold that night? Why had the chamber smelled like roses, not smoke? Why did her coffin remain cool even after the furnace roared? Noi returned to the records room, this time alone. He checked the cremation logs, the heat signatures, timings, incense offerings. Chanika's entry was marked complete. Burned at 10:47 p.m., ashes sealed and delivered. But the timestamp was strange. Exactly 7 minutes, no more, no less. Even the smallest body takes longer to burn. He flipped further. No accompanying weight recorded. No signature for the urn's transfer. Only a red stamp. Private ritual. No oversight required. He descended to the base of the cremation chamber.
a level only the head monk or funeral master was supposed to access. There, beneath a loose wooden slot, he found something impossible. A hidden crawl space. Dusty, cramped, cold. And inside, a second furnace. Unused, sealed shut, and cold as stone. He opened it, and there she was, Chanika's body, perfectly preserved, face serene, still dressed in red, hands folded over her chest, clutching the same garland of dead white orchids. Noi fell to his knees, not from fear, but from sorrow. All this time she had been right here, trapped beneath the furnace that was supposed to release her, buried beneath layers of smoke and lies, offered to a flame that never came. And now her soul remained rootless because the ritual had never ended. That night she came to him again, not in a dream, but in the mirror, the small cracked one above the temple sink. Noi was washing his hands when he looked up and saw her instead of himself, her reflection, her eyes, her tears. Now you see me. Now will you burn me? He turned, no one behind him. But when he looked again, the mirror had fogged over, and written in condensation was a single phrase, together. Noi now knew what she wanted, not just a cremation, a wedding pyre. She had been prepared as a bride. She had waited beneath the veil. She had wept, died, returned, and now she wanted the ritual finished, but not with the groom they chose, with him, Noi, the one who lifted the veil, the one who listened, the one who stayed. He returned to the hidden chamber the next evening. Carefully, reverently, he lifted her body from the cold metal. It was shockingly light, as if her bones no longer held weight, but only memory. He dressed her in fresh robes, white this time, not red. He braided her hair. He placed jasmine and marigold at her feet. And then he whispered, "I will free you, but I will not be your sacrifice." But the moment he said that, the lights went out. The cremation hall groaned, and the body in his arms exhaled, a long, low breath, as if it had waited years to be held again. Noi stumbled back. Chanika's body did not move, but her eyes, those eyes that once cried beneath the veil, now bled. Thin trails of red streamed down her cheeks, and from the walls he heard voices, chanting, low, male, familiar, the same tone he had heard in his dreams during the black wedding in the tunnels of fire. Burn the bride, bind the soul, groom must see, groom must hold. Noi clutched his ears. "Stop it! I'm not your groom!" But the chants continued, and Chanika opened her eyes. They were empty now. Not white, not black, just hollow, like burned-out lanterns. She sat upright. "Then give me mine. Bring me the ashes of the one I was promised, and I will go." Noi whispered. "They said he was already burned." She tilted her head. "No, they said he was consumed. That is not the same." Noi fled the chamber and climbed the narrow stairs, breath ragged. He didn't look back, but he felt her following, not in footsteps, but in temperature. The entire temple grew cold behind him. the kind of cold that kills flowers in seconds, the kind that wakes the dead. That night, Noi spoke with Luang Pi Dan Chai one final time. What does she mean, he was consumed? The monk sat in silence. Then, reluctantly, he said, "There is a ritual older than ghost marriages, older than black-veiled funerals. It's called the absorption. And then instead of burying a soul, you burn it with herbs and cursed chants so it feeds the altar. The body turns to ash, but the soul is used to protect, to empower, or to curse." Noi's skin crawled. What if that soul was her groom? Dan Chai looked grave. Then she has no one to follow, no one to meet her in the next world. She is untethered. Which means, his voice dropped, she'll look for someone else. Noi knew what he had to do. He had to find the remnants of her original groom. Not ashes, not bones, but something that the fire didn't consume. Hair, teeth, blood-soaked silk, something that still bore his name, and burn it with her. Only then would the marriage be complete. Only then could her soul leave. Or she would take Noi with her. He returned to the sealed record room. This time he ignored the warnings, ignored the chants, ignored the veil that hung above the furnace now like a banner. He went straight to the back, to the old scrolls marked with salt, and there, behind them, he found a clay jar, wrapped in red thread, tagged with a single name, Pran Tanarat, Chanika's intended. Inside were teeth, blackened and cracked, and a piece of scorched red fabric, damp with something that hadn't dried even after a year. He took them and whispered to the empty air, "Tomorrow I finish it. Tomorrow you are free." From the shadows, a voice replied, "Or you are mine."
The teeth clicked in the jar. Every time Noi touched it, even gently, they shifted, not with gravity, but with intention, as if they recognized the one now holding them. Pran Tanarat, the name once whispered in sacred chants, the man Chanika had been bound to, the groom who never came. But now Noi knew the truth. Pran hadn't been waiting on the other side, because Pran had never left. He sat cross-legged before the cremation furnace, the jar placed carefully between his palms. He could feel the weight of its contents, but it wasn't physical. It was spiritual, the kind of weight only betrayal could hold. He opened the lid. Inside, beneath the blackened teeth and scorched cloth, lay something far more damning. A wedding ring twisted by heat, and a scrap of parchment sealed in red wax, still intact. Noi unrolled it slowly. It was written in blood. "By flame and flesh we consume this soul. He shall protect the Tipwanich name for 10 generations. His bride shall follow, or be bound in waiting." Noi's hands trembled. Chanika had never been meant to marry Pran out of love. She was the second half of a curse. Pran had been offered first, his body burned, his soul absorbed, used to feed the ancestral altar. And she, still breathing, still warm, was meant to follow, a sacrifice to complete the contract, a bride for a dead man already used up. That night, as the wind howled outside the cremation hall and the temple bells rattled without hands, she came. Chanika. Not weeping this time, not sad, but cold, controlled, awake. Her red dress no longer flowed behind her, it gripped her body like skin. Her feet no longer glided, they stamped, heavy on the wooden floor. And her eyes, Noi couldn't meet them, because they weren't eyes anymore. They were mirrors, reflecting all that had been taken from her. You found him. She stepped closer. You held what they took from me. Noi nodded, heart pounding. Yes. He placed the jar before her, the teeth, the cloth, the ring. They consumed him, Chanika, used his soul for protection. There was nothing left for you to follow. She knelt slowly, staring down at the ring, then up at him. So I waited, and then you saw me. You lifted the veil, and now I have a groom again. Noi's stomach turned. No, I will help you burn it, finish it, but I am not. She raised her hand, not in threat, but in gentleness. You already are, because you didn't look away, because you stayed, because you listened. She looked down at the offerings. The ritual was never about love. It was about debt. And now we pay it together. The air grew still. The shadows in the cremation hall leaned inward. Noi lit the candles one by one. 7 flames for 7 names lost to this ritual. 7 lives bound to altars. 7 brides burned for the wealth of men. He recited no mantra. He knew now that prayers did nothing without truth. Instead, he whispered her name, Chanika. And then, one by one, he placed the items into the fire. The teeth, blackened bone of a hollowed-out man. The cloth, still wet with secrets. The ring, twisted like the fate that bound them. And last, the veil. The fire roared, not like a furnace, but like a voice. It screamed, it cried, it chanted in ancient tongues. The flames curled blue, then red, then black. Noi's skin blistered with heat, but he did not move. He watched as the fire devoured everything. And then, she stepped in. Chanika. Without fear, without anger, without tears. She walked into the flame as if it were home, and she did not burn. She disappeared, like mist drawn back into the earth. When the fire went out, the hall was silent. Only a faint smell of jasmine remained, and on the edge of the furnace lay the wedding ring, now cooled, now whole. Noi picked it up, held it in his hand, and for the first time in weeks, he felt empty. But not in pain, not in fear, in release, like something had finally let go. But that night, as he returned to his room, he saw it, folded neatly on his pillow, a red veil, with his name sewn into the hem. The veil sat on his pillow, scarlet silk, gold-threaded trim, and sewn delicately along the hemline in crimson calligraphy, "To my groom, forever." Noi stared at it for hours, unmoving. He hadn't placed it there. No one in the temple could have, and yet there it lay, waiting, as if it had always belonged to him. Not a gift, a claim. The next morning, he wrapped it carefully in black cloth and took it to the furnace. But as he reached for the ignition, the fire refused to light. Not a spark, not a flicker. He tried again, then again. The matchsticks crumbled,
The gas line hissed, but the flames withdrew, like they recognized what he held and refused to consume it. This veil was no longer silk. It was a spiritual tether, a binding, and it would not burn without permission. He turned to Lung Pi Dan Chai one final time. The old monk was seated in the courtyard, surrounded by dead leaves and dying incense sticks, his eyes glazed with something deeper than weariness, something closer to surrender. Noi held out the veil. "It has my name now." Dan Chai didn't touch it. He only nodded. "She's chosen you." The bond was sealed the moment you lifted her veil and looked into her eyes. You gave her witness, you gave her form, and now she's following the ritual to its end. Noi's voice cracked. "I didn't agree to any of this." Dan Chai looked toward the horizon. "Nor did she. That's what makes it binding." Noi refused to accept it. He had given her fire. He had burned the items of her groom. He had listened to her pain, and she had stepped into the flames without dragging him with her. So why had she left the veil behind? Why his name? That night, she came again. Not in dreams, not in shadows. She sat on the edge of his bed, like a bride on her wedding night. But her face was no longer pale. It was blooming with life, as if the fire had fed her, as if his devotion had made her whole. "You think it's over," she said gently, "but this was never about burning the past. It's about becoming part of it." She leaned closer. "You fulfilled the ritual for me. So now I fulfill it for you." Noi shook his head. "I never agreed." Her gaze didn't waver. "But you wore the veil. You carried the offering. You lit the fire. You gave me your name." She reached for his wrist, not with cold, dead hands, but with warmth, flesh that pulsed, skin that held weight. "I am no longer a ghost. I am yours, and you are mine." The bond could no longer be burned. It had become blood. Noi ran to the temple archives that night, desperate. He searched for reversal rites, the kind buried in forgotten scrolls, the ones no one dared perform. At last, he found a page bound in dried rose petals and ash. Title: Ritual of Severance for Spirits Who Love Too Deeply. He read through the steps, breath catching at every line. The severance could be done, but it required 3 flames, one from the body of the living, one from the spirit's unburned relic, and one from the temple that held their bond. Only if all 3 were burned together could the spirit release the living. Otherwise, the spirit would remain, and the living would slowly fade into death, becoming neither corpse nor ghost, but something in between. Noi prepared the ritual. He returned to the hidden chamber, brought the veil, brought the remains from the clay jar, and last brought a strand of his own hair and a drop of his own blood. He set them on the stone slab beside the furnace, lit the fire, but as he began the chant, the flames flickered red, then black. The temperature dropped, and a voice echoed from within the furnace. "You think you can leave." Chanika stepped out from the dark, her form still beautiful, but now veiled once more. This time, He wore the wedding robes. The spirit had turned the ritual against him. He had prepared his own binding. You completed the fire. You honored the dead. You held the veil. And now it cannot be severed. The fire burst around them. Images swirled in the smoke. Weddings from the past, brides offered, grooms buried, spirits screaming behind red silk, and in the center, Noi, alone, bound. But then something shifted. He looked at Chanika, really looked, and saw the grief still in her eyes, not malice, memory. He stepped toward her. No more burning, no more contracts. He took the veil, folded it, and placed it inside the fire, along with the ring she once wore. The fire consumed them both, not in rage, but in silence. Chanika's form flickered, her voice softened. "Will you remember me?" He nodded. "I already do." "Then I can go." And she smiled, the first true smile he had ever seen from her, as she dissolved into ash. Noi collapsed. When he awoke, the fire had died, and the red veil was gone. For real. No ash, no thread, no name. Only silence.
Noi awoke to the sound of bells, but there were no monks in the courtyard, no wind, no hands pulling ropes, just a single bell, slow, deliberate, ringing through the empty temple like a heartbeat. Dong, dong, dong. He opened his eyes. He wasn't in his room. He was back in the cremation hall, lying on the cold stone floor, the furnace behind him, dark and quiet, the altar before him lit with 3 fresh sticks of incense, still burning. Someone had placed them there, not as an offering, but as a reminder. He stood slowly, head throbbing, arms weak. The events of the ritual blurred in his memory. Fire, the veil, her smile before dissolving into ash. He had ended it, he was sure. But the veil was gone without a trace, and that was what terrified him most. Because fire always leaves something behind. But there was nothing. No ash, no thread, not even the smell of smoke. For the rest of the day, Noi wandered the temple like a ghost himself. He didn't speak, he didn't eat, and no one noticed. Even a John Prosert, who once watched him like a shadow, now looked through him, as if Noi had become a part of the stone, the smoke, the silence. At first, Noi blamed exhaustion, but by evening the signs were clear. Something had stayed behind. Not her, but her imprint. He tried to write in his notebook, a journal he'd kept since childhood, but the words weren't his. He watched his own hand scribble in red ink. A groom never leaves the altar. He dropped the pen, looked down. His fingernails were stained dark, not in ink, but with dried vermilion, the sacred red used to mark the forehead of brides. He rushed to the sink, scrubbed until his skin bled, but the stain remained. That night, Noi dreamed again. Only this time, he wasn't standing beside Chanika. He was Chanika, buried, bound, screaming behind wax-sealed lips. And the people watching were not strangers. They were monks, temple elders, Ajahn Prosert, and in the front row, Noi, smiling, holding a veil. He woke choking, his pillow soaked not with sweat, but with water, salt water, like tears from another world. He tried to speak with Luangpi Danchai the next morning, but the elder monk had vanished. No one had seen him. His room was locked, his bedding untouched. And inside his room, pinned to the door, a folded red veil, with no name this time, only a whisper written on the silk. You carried me, now I carry you. Noi's body changed first. Nosebleeds, chills, rashes in the shape of burned flowers across his chest. He began hearing voices beneath the mantras at morning prayer, whispers behind the chants, breaths that did not belong to the living. When he looked into mirrors, his reflection stared back too slowly. Sometimes it didn't blink when he did. Sometimes it smiled when he didn't. One night in the kitchen, Ajahn Prosert found him staring into an unlit stove, eyes glazed, mouth whispering a chant in a language long dead. When the old man touched his shoulder, Noi turned and spoke in her voice, soft, sad, melodic. Why do you look away, Prosert? Didn't you once call me daughter? The old man collapsed. Noi blinked, came back to himself, and didn't remember a word. The possession was not violent, not like the stories. There was no screaming, no twisting limbs, no levitating bodies. It was slow, creeping, like warm fingers pressing into his spine, one vertebrae at a time. She didn't invade him, she blended, until his thoughts weren't his voice wasn't his memories blurred. He couldn't remember the name of his mother, but he could recite word for word the wedding vows of the Tip-One-Ich ritual. In the temple's outer courtyard, a young monk lit incense and turned to Noi. "Who are you lighting that for?" he asked, innocently. Noi smiled faintly. "For my groom," he said. Then blinked, shocked, confused, afraid. The monk backed away. Noi collapsed to the ground. Ajahn Prosert finally intervened, dragged Noi to the cremation hall, forced him to kneel before the cold furnace. "Speak her name," he growled. "Call her out. Force her to leave." Noi tried, but his tongue would not move. His throat closed, and when he opened his mouth, he sang, a wedding chant in a voice that was not his own. Ajahn Prosert broke, fell to his knees. "This is my fault," he whispered. "I let them bring her here. I buried her alive. I sealed her fate." Noi turned to him, eyes glassy. "Then you know what must happen." The voice was hers, but the tears streaming down his face were Noi's. There was only one option now, a purification ritual, a dangerous rite performed when a soul does not leave cleanly, one that risks the body to salvage the spirit. A spiritual fire, not of flame, but of remembrance, not to exorcise her, but to release both of them. At dawn, Noi stepped back into the cremation hall. He placed 3 items on the altar: the cracked mirror, a lotus flower dipped in ash, the charred wedding ring now bent into a crescent. He lit incense, closed his eyes, and whispered, "You are not mine, and I am not yours. We both were stolen. Now let's return what was taken." The smoke rose in spirals. He felt her stir inside him, but this time she did not resist. She breathed with him, faded with him, and as he opened his eyes, he was alone. No voice, no whispers, no mirror smiles, only silence. True silence for the first time in weeks. But possession always leaves something behind. And when Noi walked outside, the bell rang once more. Dong, dong, dong. And in the temple garden, a single orchid bloomed overnight. Blood red, vein pink, with petals shaped like a bride's veil. Noi no longer dreamed. Not of Chanukah, not of fire, not even of the veil. But the silence that followed her departure was not peace, it was pressure. The weight of something unfinished, like air before a storm. She was gone, but her ritual remained. In the days that followed the purification, Noi wandered the temple grounds with a strange clarity. The fog that once wrapped around his thoughts had lifted. He could think again, breathe again. But the deeper he looked, into the halls, the archives, the walls of names, the more he saw the pattern and the horror. There were other brides, other names that never made it to the public registry. Some erased from the ledgers, some buried beneath different names. Girls, women, daughters of poor families, sold, disguised, cremated without witnesses, and all listed in the forbidden ledger under one common seal. Ritual completed, veiled offering. Noi realized something terrifying. Chanukah had not been the last. She had been the most recent. And the ritual wasn't over. It was still happening. He confronted Ajahn Prasert first. The old man was sweeping ash outside the cremation hall, his back hunched, his eyes dim. Noi didn't yell. He simply knelt before him and placed the list of names on the ground. "How many did you burn?" Prasert didn't answer. "How many were alive?" Still, silence. Then finally, "I only opened the door," the old man rasped. "It was the families who paid. It was the monks who permitted. I only lit the fire." Noi leaned forward, voice sharp. "Lighting the fire is what kills them." There was no forgiveness in that moment, only understanding. Because Noi now saw what must be done. He would burn the ritual backwards, a reversal, not for Chanukah, but for every bride before her. He spent the next 3 days gathering what he needed. Pages torn from the forbidden ledger, funeral tags of the unmaimed, ashes from the unclaimed urns, strips of red veil collected from temple storage, and, most important, a bowl of salt water collected at dawn from the temple's sacred pond.
used only for cleansing broken spirit contracts. Luang Pi Dunchai had once spoken of a rite called turning the veil, an inversion ceremony meant to unbind ghosts married in secrecy. But it came with a warning. The ghosts must be willing, or they will return, angrier. Noi was ready to take that risk. On the 7th night after the ritual, Noi entered the cremation hall alone. He wore white, carried no incense, spoke no chants, only truth. He placed 7 urns on the ground, urns of brides never claimed. He placed the red veil scraps in a circle. He lit a single black candle, and with his own blood, he wrote in the ash, "I break the marriage you never chose. I return your names to silence. I call you not to serve, but to leave." Then he lifted the bowl of salt water and poured it over the veil circle. It hissed as it hit the ground, like something alive was being boiled away. And that's when the wind began. The cremation hall groaned. The walls vibrated. The candle went out, and in the shadows, they came. 7 brides, each wearing a red veil, each faceless, each weeping silently. But none stepped forward, not yet. They stood just beyond the circle, their silence thunderous. Noi fell to his knees. He bowed his head and whispered, "I see you. I saw her. Now I return what was stolen." One of the brides stepped forward. Her veil lifted, not by wind, but by memory, and beneath it, Chanaka. But not as he remembered her, not angry, not sad, free. She smiled. "You called them. You broke the veil. They can go now." Noi reached toward her, but her form was already fading. "What about me?" he asked. She smiled. "You stayed. That is enough." One by one, the brides walked into the furnace, not to burn, but to vanish, to complete what was left undone. No screams, no fire, only quiet. And as the last one disappeared, the air shifted. Warmth returned. The veil circle crumbled into ash, and Noi was left alone again. But this time, not haunted, not possessed, just quiet. He stood, walked to the furnace, lit a stick of incense, and whispered 7 names, not the real ones, but new names. Names he gave them, names he remembered, names only he would carry now. The ritual was reversed. The door was closed, but the temple was still tainted. So Noi made a decision. The next morning, he walked to the abbot's office and placed the forbidden ledger on the desk. shut down the cremation hall. The abbot stared at him. "You have no authority." Noy looked him dead in the eyes. "Then I'll bring the press, the police, the monks from the city. You either close it or I'll burn it down myself." By sundown, the gates were chained, the keys removed, the fires silenced, and the ghosts, they had nothing left to cling to.
The gates were locked, the keys turned in silence, the cremation hall shut, cold, lightless. Noy stood alone outside the iron doors, hands trembling. He should have felt peace. He should have felt freedom. But all he felt was unfinished. The silence wasn't clean. It was hollow, like something had been paused, not ended. For days, the temple remained untouched. Monks avoided the hall. Villagers whispered again, like they had years ago, about the smoke that once curled like fingers, the coffins that arrived late at night, and the brides who were never seen leaving. But no one dared approach, except Noy. He returned on the 14th night, just before the full moon, the day Chanika had been sealed, the day the veil had first been lowered. He didn't come with incense, or offerings, or scrolls. He came with a single match, a folded red ribbon, and a question that had haunted him since the beginning. What if she never wanted to leave? Inside, the cremation hall hadn't changed. Dust covered the floor. The altar was cracked. The air smelled of wax and old prayers. And in the center of the room, where the furnace once roared, a coffin waited. Not new, not old, somehow familiar. Its white lacquer dulled by shadow, its edges curled with ash, its lid slightly ajar. Noy stepped closer. He didn't ask how it got there. He didn't need to, because deep down, he had known it would return. He had burned the ritual. He had freed the brides. But her story wasn't finished. Not yet. He touched the coffin. It was warm. He opened the lid slowly. And there she was, Chanika, lying as he had first seen her, in a red wedding dress, veil folded across her chest, hands clutching a garland of orchids, fresh this time. Her face serene, not like the dead, not like a ghost, like a bride, waiting. Noy whispered, "Why are you still here?" The room held its breath, and then her eyes opened, slowly, softly, without surprise. "Because you haven't chosen." Noy staggered back. "Chosen what?" She sat up. The veil slipped from her lap and landed softly on the floor. "To burn it all, or to join me?" "You severed the ritual. You reversed the bond." "But your soul is still here, because part of it wanted to stay." "I wanted to help you." "You did. I wanted to end this." "You tried. But I'm not yours." She stood slowly. Her bare feet touched the cold floor, but she did not shiver. She walked toward him. "And yet you came back." He closed his eyes, thought of the village, the silence, the way no one said her name, the way no one remembered, all except him, the one who lifted the veil, the one who looked, listened, loved perhaps, in his own broken way. Chanika raised a hand, not to possess, not to bind,
but to offer. One final night, she whispered, not in dreams, not in fire, but in truth. Let me show you what was stolen from us. Then you may choose, return or remain. He took her hand, and the world vanished. He stood now in the past, in her memory. He saw the wedding altar they had built, the one the villagers never saw, the monks never blessed, the one with salt circle edges and cursed candles. He saw her father weeping, not out of grief, but out of guilt. He saw the monk chanting, eyes closed, already paid. He saw her breathing in that coffin, shaking, eyes wide under the veil. And he saw himself, younger, but there, watching, not truly present, but fated, as if some piece of him had always been in this moment, waiting to return. The memory faded. He was back in the cremation hall, and she was standing before the furnace. "Burn me again," she said, "this time, truly." Noy didn't hesitate. He lifted the match, lit the veil, placed it beside the coffin, and watched it catch. The flames rose slowly, not violent, not angry, just warm. He turned to her. She smiled. "Thank you. Now you can go." But he didn't move. Not at first. He looked at the empty room, at the furnace, at the ashes curling along the floor, at the smoke curling toward the ceiling, carrying her name. And in that moment, he asked himself something he never had before. What if I want to stay? He stepped forward. She turned, surprised. Noy! But he didn't stop. He stepped into the flame beside her, and it did not burn. It welcomed. The doors of the cremation hall slammed shut. The bell above the temple rang once, then broke. And outside, no one noticed. No one came. Because the world had moved on, and those who walk between ashes and silence are rarely missed.
The fire did not scream. It sang, a soft, low hum that vibrated through the floorboards of the cremation hall like a lullaby long forgotten. It wasn't violent, it wasn't cruel, it was sacred. The flames surrounded Noy and Chanika, but did not devour them. Not yet. Not in the way fire usually does. This was ritual flame, the kind summoned not by match or gas, but by memory. They stood side by side at the heart of the pyre. Noy no longer flinched at the heat. He no longer feared the veil. And Chanika, her skin aglow, her smile soft, was no longer the weeping ghost he'd first met. She was whole, not human, not spirit, something in between. The walls of the cremation hall shifted, reality softened, and around them bloomed visions, not dreams, but remembrances, flashes of the past like smoke catching light. A child version of Chanika, holding a red ribbon and pretending it was a veil. Her mother braiding her hair. A village wedding where she watched from the shadows, never imagining it would one day be hers and not hers. A younger Noy lighting incense for his long-dead father, whispering prayers he didn't understand. Sitting outside the temple gates as a boy, watching the smoke rise, wondering why it always smelled like sorrow. Two lives, separate, yet shaped by the same fire. The flames pulsed, then rose higher,
And the voices came, not screaming, chanting, low, male, monastic, but ancient. Voices not bound to this world. Bride and groom, bound in breath, joined in fire, part in death. Chanika looked to Noi. "It's time." He nodded. "For what?" Her gaze was soft. "For you to choose. The veil is gone. The contract is broken. You may walk away. But if you stay, you burn with me." Noi turned to the door. It was open now. Beyond it, sunrise, birds, a return to breath and rice bowls and temple chants. He could leave. He could forget. He could start again. But when he looked down at his hands, they were not empty. He was still holding the orchid garland she had been buried with, still holding her memory, still holding her name. He turned back to her, and for the first time said the words he hadn't dared speak. "I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to." Chanika smiled. It wasn't a bride's smile, not seduction, not victory, just peace. The chanting grew louder, the fire thickened, and now the floorboards beneath them began to burn, not destructively, but transformatively. The cremation hall melted away, in its place an altar of light, surrounding them veils unraveling into wind, and above them the sky broke into embers. This was not a death. This was a joining, a wedding that had been promised through lies and finally fulfilled through truth, a union not of body and body, but of witness and spirit, wound and salve, silence and voice. Chanika took his hand, he took hers, and the final vow was made. No temple, no monk, no chant, just one breath spoken together. We return what was taken. We forgive what was done. We carry no more weight. We go together. And the fire finally burned, not red, not orange, but white, the kind of flame that purifies rather than destroys, that lifts rather than scorches, that frees. The veil rose in the air like a bird and dissolved in the wind. The ring cracked and vanished. The ashes curled and danced, and in the center of it all, nothing. Not a scream, not a name, just light. And then, darkness. The wedding was complete, but no one saw it, because some stories aren't meant to be witnessed, only felt, only whispered, only feared or loved. Morning came quietly. No bells rang, no monks chanted. The cremation hall stood still, its doors ajar, as if someone had opened them during the night and never returned to close them. The villagers noticed first a strange stillness in the wind, the absence of smoke from the temple chimney. But no one approached. They said nothing, because some places are better left unspoken. When Ajahn Prasert awoke, he knew something was gone. He shuffled across the temple grounds in his old sandals, stopping before the cremation hall. The smell of incense had vanished. No smoke, no heat, only silence. He entered slowly. The furnace was cold, the floor clean, The walls held no soot. It was as if no fire had ever touched them, as if everything that once happened here had been wiped away, erased, burned into forgetting. But there, in the center of the room, a pair of footprints in the ash, one set, bare, as if someone had walked through the fire and left without leaving. And beside them, resting gently atop a folded piece of white cloth, lay a veil, not red, but white, a bride's veil, clean, new, except stitched into the hem in pale gray thread was a single name, Noy. Ajahn Prasert's hands trembled as he reached for it, but the moment his fingers touched the silk, a wind moved through the room. No source, no warning, just a hush, a voice that was not voice, a breath that was not air. You do not carry us anymore. We are not yours. We belong to the flame now. And with that, the veil dissolved into ash, into smoke, into nothing. In the weeks that followed, the temple resumed its routines. The cremation hall remained locked. New monks arrived. The villagers no longer whispered, but they did leave orchids at the temple gate, without reason, without name, just petals, white and red. One night, a new apprentice arrived, young, thin, shy-eyed like Noy had once been. They gave him a room near the back, taught him how to fold robes, how to light incense, how to tend to the fire. He asked no questions, until one evening, sweeping ashes from the furnace, he found a mirror tucked behind a loose stone in the wall. Small, cracked. When he looked into it, he saw a man in white robes, not himself, a little older, eyes gentle, hands scarred, and draped over his head a white veil. The apprentice blinked, and the mirror shattered. Outside, the wind rose, the orchids rustled, and somewhere far beyond what the living could hear, a bride and a groom walked side by side. No fire, no veil, just the quiet sound of footsteps. Finally, leaving.